Hello and welcome to another live stream. This is Nicholas. Today we're talking about the Lunar New Year, we're talking about food, we're talking about food stagnation, we're talking about diet in Chinese medicine, and then we'll do a Q&A. So if you're here watching live, let me know where you're watching from. If you're watching on the replay, just let me know in the comments where you're from. And then, if you know it, maybe let me know what your zodiac is. Because this is a new year, we're entering the year of the ox. I was born in the year of the rat, we're just ending the year of the rat, and that was a terrible year. So hopefully this year will be better. Alright, let me click off of that real quick. So just a quick update. Because I've been kind of off the map for the last month and a half. I just moved to Colorado, so between moving and the holidays, I've not really been making any videos for the last month, but now I'm here settled in Colorado. It's 1 degree Fahrenheit today, so that's great, but I'm all settled in Colorado, and I have everything set up. I'm in a new space. Maybe it looks the same because I'm just in front of another blank wall. I have a new plant. But now that I'm kind of settled in, we're going to get back into making videos. And I also want to start doing live streams every week again, because that was really fun. I think we had a lot of fun with that. And I think what I'm going to do moving forward is try to have a little topic for each one, so we can have a short 10 to 15 minute talk on some sort of topic about Chinese medicine, and then we'll just open it up to a live Q&A. So actually, when I originally was planning this, I was going to do Chinese terms that come up in formulas a lot, just so people can have a better understanding of the names of formulas and the Chinese terms we use. But then it turns out that Friday is New Year's Day, so instead we're going to talk about the Lunar New Year, and maybe we'll do that next week. We'll talk about some more herbal stuff. So let's see if my buttons still work. Ooh, look at that. Leon Tien is from the Netherlands. Hi! I think I got a couple emails from people in the Netherlands. Make sure I'm looking at the right camera. I think, yeah, and more from the Netherlands. Hi, what time is it in the Netherlands? Elizabeth is here. Here, make that go away. Elizabeth, from the Year of the Dog. That's really cool. I think dogs are very loving and very loyal. So just like with animals, we say like dogs are our best friends. I think the same thing happens with people who are born in the Year of the Dog. They're very nice, very loyal, very lovable. Ooh, Year of the Ox. Oxes are fun. Oxes are very hardworking. We'll kind of talk about that. They don't... Sorry, I'm not sure how to use the screen anymore. They're very hardworking. They kind of plod along. They're very reliable. So oxes are good. It's just that because now we're in the Year of the Ox, that's actually really bad luck. So we can talk about that. Oh, 7 p.m. in the Netherlands. That's not too bad. Sometimes I have people coming in from the Philippines or something, and it's like 4 in the morning there. Let's get rid of this. Born in the Year of the Sheep. I don't know much about sheep. I think sheep are more, they're kind of quiet and maybe more passive. I don't know if that's true. I might be making that up. I actually don't know very much about astrology. But I wanted to talk about this. This was kind of funny because earlier this week I released a podcast episode with a friend of mine, Natalie Vale. We went to school together and we started talking about astrology. Here, I have a button for that too. So if you haven't heard, I have a podcast at podcast.tcmstudy.net where we kind of drink and talk about Chinese medicine. So far, we've been talking to a lot of people about how to start a practice and what it's like going into business. But then we also go off into random topics. So earlier this week, I had a podcast with Natalie Vale, and we started talking about the zodiacs and the Lunar New Year and the story of the 12 animals. And so I thought it was kind of funny that earlier this week, there's a YouTube channel that I really like to watch called Tasting History with Max Miller, and he released an episode about niangao, a rice cake that's eaten on the New Year, and he also told the story of the zodiac animals. So if you haven't heard the story, I think it's kind of funny. The reason why we have 12 animals and the reason why they go in that order is the Jade Emperor got all the animals together and made a race. And so he said, whoever wins the race, the order that you come in, that's going to be the order of the zodiacs. So all the 12 animals got together and they had this race. The rat was in the lead. But then they got to a river, and the rat had been in the lead the whole time, but the rat couldn't swim. He couldn't cross the river. So he turned to his friend the ox and said, "Hey, ox, let me ride on your back." And that way you could get across the river. So the ox was very friendly and said, "Yes, okay." Until the rat jumped up and they swam across the river. And as soon as they got to the other side, the rat flipped them the bird and ran on ahead and won the race. And so that's why the year starts with the zodiacs start with the rat. The rat is the one who won the race. So the rat's a kind of a jerk. Like I said, I was born in the year of the rat. That was also, so the ox came in second because he helped the rat cross the river, and then it's funny, the pig came in last because the pig had to stop and eat a snack and take a nap, and so that's why the pig is last. So that's kind of a funny story, and there are a couple different versions of that story. In some versions, there are 13 animals. The 13th animal is the cat, and so I've heard some versions where it's the cat was asleep and the rat was supposed to wake him up in time for the race, but the rat didn't, so the cat slept through the race and he didn't finish, so the cat doesn't get to be part of the zodiac. I heard another story where it was actually both the rat and the cat got on the ox's back, and like in the middle of the river, the rat pushed him off, and so the rat drowned and died, and that's why there's no cat in the zodiac, because the rat was a jerk and pushed him off. So rats are jerks. So it's kind of good that we're ending the year of the rat and now we're moving into the year of the ox. So that's another thing we talked about in the podcast, is some of the characteristics of the ox. Oxes are very strong. They're very hardworking. Think about an ox pulling a plow and plowing the fields. They just kind of plod along. They put their head down and go in a straight line. They don't look left or right. They don't veer off course. They just work hard, don't complain, and plod along. And then what's funny, another thing Natalie said is that oxes tend to be very boring, which I thought that was kind of funny, but that might also say something about the upcoming year, that this is going to be a very boring year. This is going to be a very steady, plodding, just moving forward, no excitement type of year, which is actually probably a good thing. That's probably what we want. Yeah, so David is saying sheep goat is not a popular sign in Asia. I guess parents don't want sheep or goats. So I have too many things on my screen. Let me make that a little bit smaller. Yeah, I think that's always kind of funny. I think maybe it's they're like too docile or too passive. I don't know. But it's kind of funny that you hear things like that. Like I think it was the year 2016. That was the year of a U.S. presidential election. That was the year of the fire monkey. And so I think that's another one that people don't want to have children born in the year of the monkey, because monkeys are very rambunctious, they're tricksters. I mean, think about like real monkeys throwing their feces around. That's kind of what monkeys do. Or I think in Chinese astrology, monkeys are seen as very mischievous. They like to play pranks. And so a lot of parents don't want to have a child that was born in the year of the monkey. And when you add fire energy on top of that, it's especially bad. So I think when you have a year of a fire monkey, the birth rate plummets because nobody wants to have a child in that year. I also one of my Chinese teachers, we were talking about this, and there was a female student who was born in the year of the tiger, and this was kind of an older Chinese gentleman, and he kind of said, actually, traditionally in China, they like tigers, but they don't like girls who are born in the year of the tiger because they're too strong, they're too headstrong, and it's hard to find them husbands. So I thought that was kind of funny too. That's something we probably shouldn't say anymore, but that was something he mentioned traditionally. Oh, golden pig. That's really nice. Yeah, I've heard that pigs, like I said, the pig came in last because the pig stopped for a snack and took a nap. So I think pigs like to be pampered. Pigs like luxury. So that's kind of cool. I got my ridiculously large bowl of dumplings that I fried and not steamed. So I don't know if that's cheating. So the other thing I thought was funny, I probably shouldn't eat on a live stream. The other thing I thought was funny that came up in this video by Max Miller, I put a link in the description if you want to go see this. It's a really cool video, tasting history with Max Miller. Another story he told was the story of why you should wear red underwear. And this is a story I hadn't heard before, so I thought that was really cool. And this was another thing that we talked about with Natalie on the podcast, where I was mentioning that we were just coming off the year of the rat, and I was born in the year of the rat. So I think there's a term for that. I used to call it, it's like your Harari year, where your animal of your birth year matches the current year. I think it's actually called Ben Ming Yen. So basically, if your age is a multiple of 12, 12, 24, 36, then that's your Ben Ming Yen. And so it was the year of the rat, and I was born in the year of the rat. And when a lot of Americans hear that, they think, oh, that's really cool. It's like, this is your year. And it's actually, in Chinese astrology, it's the opposite. That when it's the year of your birth or a multiple of 12, then that's actually really bad luck. I think it's actually the god of age takes that as an insult, and so he'll like throw misfortune on you. So you have to do special things to appease or ward off the god of age who's trying to give you bad luck. And one of the things you can do is wear red underwear. And so I kind of said this in the podcast that throughout the whole year of the rat, I don't think I ever wore any red underwear. So for all the bad things that happened in 2020, I apologize because it was probably my fault for not wearing red underwear. Apparently, it has to be red underwear that somebody else buys for you. You can't buy your own red underwear. It has to be a gift from a family member or a friend or a partner or something like that. But that's how you ward off the bad luck of the year. So if, like, you were born in the year of the ox and this is the year of the ox, you might need to get some red underwear to ward off any bad luck that's coming from the god of age. So, hi Eleanor, Happy New Year. Thanks for being here. Anyway, in this video by Max Miller, he actually told the story of why you wear red underwear, and I'd never heard of this before. Before, I thought it was just red was considered a lucky color, that it symbolizes good luck. Red is very yang, whereas evil spirits are very yin, so it's like yang is overcoming the yin. And so I always just thought it was like a good luck charm. But he actually told this story that once upon a time, there was a mountain, and on that mountain, there lived a beast, a mythical beast. I don't think he said what kind of beast it is. I don't think it was a qilin, but there was some sort of beast on the mountain. And normally, the beast would stay in the mountain and just eat all the other animals that were living on the mountain. However, in the winter, all the other animals were hibernating, so that beast didn't have anything to eat. So what the beast would do would come down into the valley and eat the children at the village at the base of this mountain. And as you can imagine, the people in the village didn't like that too much. But so one day, this wandering Taoist came through, because that's what Taoists do, is they wander around. And he heard these stories about this beast coming down from the mountain during the winter time and eating the children. And so he thought he should probably do something about it. So he went and found the beast and confronted the beast and said, "Hey, beast, stop eating these children." And the beast was kind of like, "Who are you to tell me what I can and can't eat? Why do you think you can tell me not to eat children? Maybe I should just eat you instead." And so the Taoist monk was like, "Okay, if eating me means that you will spare the children of the village, I think that's a fair deal. So I think instead of the children, you should just eat me instead." But then he said, hold on a moment, let me take off my robes, because my robes are very dirty. It's going to be very unappetizing. It's not going to taste very good. So let me take off my robes in order to make myself more delicious, and then you can eat me. And so that was very nice of the monk to. It was very considerate of him to do that. So the monk took off his robes, and it turned out he just happened to be wearing red underwear. And it also just happened that this beast from the mountain was afraid of the color red. So the beast got really spooked and got scared and ran away and ran back to the mountain. So the monk, after figuring this out, he went back to the village and he said the way to ward off this beast is to use the color red, that he's very afraid of the color red. And so that's how every time at that time of the year, during the winter time, when the beast would come down, they would decorate the village in red lanterns and they'd have everything be red to ward off this beast. And then that's also why apparently you're supposed to wear red underwear. So I thought that was kind of a funny story. So I put that in the link in the description below. So check out that video by Max Miller, Tasting History. He makes a glutinous rice cake, which I think is traditionally eaten. I'm just assuming that you usually eat dumplings because I like dumplings. Let me have another one of those. What are some associations with the ox? I might be kind of making this up just because I had a friend in school who was born in the year of the ox, and he would talk about oxes a lot. So I'm just hearing this secondhand from him about some of the things about the ox. Like we said, oxes, think about oxes, they're very strong, they're very hardworking. That's why people use oxes to plow fields, because they're not necessarily very fast, but they have a lot of endurance. So they have a lot of perseverance. They'll just keep going. So think about an ox plowing the field, just kind of plodding along, one step after the other. Goes in a straight line, doesn't look left or right. And so it's kind of like strength to endure, perseverance. I think those are characteristics of the ox. And also, like I was saying before, something that Natalie said was oxes tend to be very boring. And I think going into this year, that could be what we want. We need a boring year after what a jerk the rat was. Ooh, snake. I don't know a whole lot about the snake. Sorry. I actually don't know very much about the zodiac. I just know a couple things because I have friends who were born in those years that talk about it. So if anybody knows anything about the snake, let us know. So yeah, check out that video by Max Miller. And then this is also something we talked about in the podcast with Natalie Vale. So if you wanna check that out, we do talk a little bit about the Lunar New Year. And I think she's doing I should put a link to this in the description below. She does like a prediction circle about what's coming up in the new year. So I think she's doing that live on Facebook this year. So I think there's a link to that on the podcast page if you want to go and follow Natalie Vale on Facebook. She does some cool astrology things and stuff like that. So that's kind of what's going on with the new year. I think the new year is a time where you're supposed to eat a lot of food. Maybe I'll get through those dumplings eventually. But I wanted to get into Q&A, and that kind of brings us to one of the first questions, which is about food stagnation. Because food stagnation comes up a lot of times when we're talking about the new year, because food stagnation is a sort of thing where basically it happens because you eat too much. And so in America, this would be like at Thanksgiving. When you eat a lot of turkey, eat a lot of pie, you can get food stagnation. I think in China, it's more like a New Year's festival where you would eat a lot of dumplings, or the mooncake festival or something like that. Those would be the times when you sort of develop food stagnation, is during these festival times when you eat too much food. So this was a question I had on the Patreon, and this was Ara. And she messaged me this question, and I kind of wrote something back, and I'm not sure I was very clear, so I wanted to go over this again. So she was asking about the categories of herbs. What's the difference between the food stagnation category and the aromatic transformed damp category? Because She's saying the signs and symptoms between those two categories sound very similar. And so when would you use each one, or do you ever combine those two? And that's a really good question because a lot of times food stagnation tends to go along with other things, or a lot of those spleeny things all kind of look similar. So we have like spleen Qi deficiency, middle Jow Chi stagnation, dampness in the middle Jow, and food stagnation. All of those signs and symptoms look really similar. We have things like fullness and distension in the abdomen, diarrhea or constipation, abdominal pain, acid reflux, or sometimes they say sour regurgitation, basically like rebellious stomach chi. If things can't go down, they kind of rebel back upwards, and that could be nausea, vomiting, or that could be like belching that acid comes up with. And so a lot of those things sound very similar. And yeah, that's our representative formula there is Bao for food stagnation. So that would be something that if we were eating a lot of dumplings, if you're at Thanksgiving, you can take Bao as a way to help with that food stagnation. But yeah, so what are the differences between all of these? Because sometimes the signs and symptoms look very similar, so maybe the way we can differentiate it is through some of the causes. And so basically, food stagnation is the food got stuck. It's basically you ate too much food and now it's stuck there. And like I said, this would be like Thanksgiving, where after you eat a meal, you're really bloated, you're distended, you want to loosen your belt or unbutton your pants. You have aversion to food, where it's like you ate so much pie, if you see another slice of pie, it just makes just the smell of it makes you nauseous. And so food stagnation tends to be more of an acute thing, like you ate too much food. I think the way Nigel Weissman describes it is it's where the amount or the type of food consumed is greater than the spleen's ability to process it or to transform it or to send it down into the small intestine. So basically it's either too much food or the wrong types of food, and so the food got stuck. So we can think of this category, herbs that relieve food stagnation, you can maybe think of them like digestive enzymes. It's like they dissolve the food and make it able to pass through into the small intestine. So it tends to be, I would say it's more of an acute thing. I think there is such a thing as abiding food accumulation that happens more long term, but usually when we talk about it, it tends to be more of an acute, you ate too much food and the food got stuck. And so we take these food stagnation herbs to help move it through. So you might not be using these food stagnation herbs very much unless you're in a situation like Chinese New Year or Thanksgiving or something like that. Usually people don't have chronic food stagnation. Whereas the other one that we were talking about here, aromatic transform dampness, you can think of dampness as an evil. Dampness is a pathogenic influence that comes about. It can come in externally, but when we talk about the category aromatic transform dampness, we're really more talking about dampness that occurs because the spleen fails in its function of transforming water and dampness. So this is probably more, it's not necessarily so much of an acute thing, maybe, but it's more like, it's not necessarily that you ate too much food and the food got stuck. This is more that your spleen is being lazy and your spleen crapped out and your spleen is no longer transforming the food. And so what we do is these aromatic herbs, that aroma has an ability to awaken and aliven, or I think they say arouse the spleen. And so with aromatic transform dampness, it's more that your spleen is lazy and sleepy, and so you give them aromatic herbs to wake up the spleen so that can perform its function of transforming dampness. But yeah, it is going to be, when you just look at the signs and symptoms, a lot of them are going to overlap in terms of, with food stagnation, you may have diarrhea or you may have constipation, you're going to have bloating, you're going to have nausea, you're going to have aversion to food. And those are the same things that are going to happen with dampness, that you're going to have a fullness, lack of appetite, usually loose stools or diarrhea. Maybe one of the things we can differentiate is with the dampness, you're probably more likely to have a slippery pulse and a greasy coat on the tongue, where you may not see that in food stagnation. And then, do we use them together? Not that I know of. Like we said, our biggest formula for food stagnation is Baohuan, preserve harmony pill, I think is the translation. But basically, it's a bunch of herbs that come from the food stagnation category. So Shenchu, Shanja, Lai Futsa, I feel like there's one more, and then it has some more like regulate middle Jow Chi herbs. I don't think there's really very many aromatic herbs in there. So maybe that's another way we can think about it is in that food stagnation category, there are certain herbs that work particularly well with certain types of food. So if you eat a lot of greasy meat, then use shanja. Whereas if you're eating a lot of starchy things, like steamed buns or something, then you would use guya and maya to relieve that kind of food stagnation. So there are different types of herbs for different types of foods, and that kind of lets us know that the food stagnation category is for you ate too much food and it got stuck. Aromatic transformed dampness is more like you had a lazy spleen. You need to wake up the spleen. Other things that go along with this are middle Jow Chi stagnation, where remember our Chi dynamic through the middle Jow is the spleen is supposed to upbear the clear and the stomach is supposed to descend the turbid. So if that dynamic gets interrupted, then the Chi gets stuck and you have a lot of those similar symptoms. You might have abdominal pain, rebellious Chi, sour regurgitation, and things like that. But it's not necessarily there's food that's stuck there, it's the Chi that's stuck there. And so then we use a different category of herbs that regulate Chi. And some of the causes can be very similar there too. That it could be that you ate too much food or the wrong type of food over a long period of time, and that causes the Chi to get stuck. And a lot of times we will combine those two categories. So like in Baohuan, we combine herbs that relieve food stagnation plus herbs that regulate Qi, like Alex is saying Chen Pi is there, and things like that. So those are two very similar categories. And then sometimes even spleen Qi deficiency can look very similar too, where you can have like lack of appetite, loose stools, diarrhea, things like that. But there, our cause is there's just not enough Qi for the spleen to perform its job. So besides those digestive things, we're also going to see things like fatigue, a weak pulse, things like that. Tiredness, lassitude are common signs of a Qi deficiency. So I don't know if that actually made any more sense. I was trying to clarify that, and I might have just made it more confusing. But we have a lot of those things that look similar. Spleen Qi deficiency, middle Jow Chi stagnation, dampness obstructing the middle Jow, and food accumulation. So they all look kind of similar because they're all affecting middle Jow, but with spleen Qi deficiency, it's a lack of Qi. The person feels tired, they don't have energy, and their spleen doesn't have enough energy to do its job. Middle Jow Chi stagnation, there's stuckness, but the thing that's stuck is the Qi. The Qi's not moving down like it's supposed to, so it might reverse and go back upwards and give us rebellious stomach Qi. But it's a feeling that the Qi is stuck. And this is something that can happen over a long period of time. It can happen because of spleen Qi deficiency. It can happen because of improper diet, but it's just the Qi got stuck. Dampness is a separate evil that comes with dampness is characterized by like a greasy tongue coat and a slippery pulse, and that's the spleen was failing to do its job of transforming the dampness, so the dampness started accumulating, and we get those things like loose stools. We could have cold damp or damp heat. But so basically when we use those aromatic herbs, we're trying to awaken or arouse the spleen so that it can perform its function of transforming dampness. Whereas food stagnation, you ate too much food, the food got stuck. So it's kind of like you're taking something that's a digestive aid to help dissolve the food and push it through. And so that's food stagnation. So I think food stagnation is more of an acute thing. I had a teacher argue with me about that, but I think food stagnation is more of an acute thing where he ate too much food. I think I repeated myself 3 times. So maybe that's more clear or maybe that's more confusing. When you have questions like this, one of the books I actually like is this one by Nigel Weissman and Eric Brand, Concise Chinese Materia Medica. This one does a really good job of breaking down those terms because it's written by Nigel Weissman, and he's very precise with his terminology. So one, I got this book because it has the word concise in it. So that's, you can even see just by the thickness that it's much more concise than Bensky. But this one, he does a good job of, Bensky has a lot of commentary where he talks about the individual herbs. This book does a good job of describing, I don't know if you can see that, describing what's going on with each category. So it has a better sort of category synopsis where he talks about what's causing the thing, what are our treatment principles. He even has a combination where, like, the combinations with other categories. So with food stagnation, we might combine it with spleen stomach qi stagnation, like we said, Jow Chi Stagnation, cold, food stagnation, dampness. And so this kind of gives a better overview of what the herbs are doing. And so especially if you have like really nitpicky questions, Nigel Weissman tends to be very precise with his language. So if you're like, what's the difference between food accumulation and abiding food? Nigel Weissman goes into that. If you're like, what's the difference between moving qi and coursing the liver? That's something that Nigel Weissman will talk about. So this can be a good book to have. Admittedly, I'm kind of an herb nerd, so I own 3 Materia Medicas, and I know that most people in the world don't want to spend that much money on, like they have 1 Materia Medica and they barely read it. Maybe you don't need 3 Materia Medicas. So if this is in your library, it might be worth looking at and see if you like it better than Bensky. So hopefully that was clear about food stagnation and aromatic transform dampness. I was trying to avoid this. Eleanor is asking about Machiocha, the channels of acupuncture. The channels of oh, it's on that shelf over there. I can't reach it. The channels of acupuncture is an orange or gold book that goes over all the channels. Sometimes when we say Machiocha Gold, we're talking about a different book, but this is a similar color. And reviewing the eye system. Have you found the system clinically relevant for the treatment of neurological disorders? Honestly, I feel like this is something they made me teach or they made me cover in points 1, and I never quite understood the point of it. This is something, when he says points of the eye system, this is something I've only seen in Machiocha. If you look in Deadman, there's nothing about the points of the eye system. If you look in Cam, I don't think there's anything about the points of the eye system. Sometimes Deadman goes off in weird directions, and that can be okay sometimes, but I'm not sure this points of the eye system is a hugely mainstream thing. I've never heard any of my Chinese teachers talk about it, so it could just be that the people that Machiocha studied with, they talked a lot about this. I'm not sure if you ask other people in China, maybe they don't, maybe they know what you're talking about, or maybe they don't. So points of the eye system seem to be points around the eyes or other points along the head. And so basically it's like points of the eye system are like, they're basically points in your eye. So it's like if you have problems in your eye, stick needles in the eye, like UB1, stomach 1, stuff like that. I think there are some of those extra points. So to some extent, that's very straightforward. And then we have other points that are not on the eye, but they're kind of connected to the eye. It's like, I think due 16 is one of them. So it seemed kind of a weird system to me where like you don't have to formally call it the points of the eye system. You can just be like, if there are things that are going on in the eye, treat the eye. And then we have things like due 16 and due 20 enter the brain. And so if you're treating neurological disorders, I would think about those points anyway, just because a branch of the due channel enters the brain. And then other scalp points will help with neurological disorders as well. So that's kind of a weird thing where I feel like Machiocha has one page on that. I've never seen anything else about it anywhere else, so it could be that you have to ask someone else about it. Yeah, nape of the neck. I think like maybe GB20 is another one. Stuff like that. But I think it's just like, even if you had never heard the term points of the eye system or anything like that, if you were treating eye disorders or neurological disorders, you might tend to go to those points anyway. So I just think it's kind of weird that he creates a separate system for it. So I don't know if that was very helpful. That was one of those things like I never really heard of very much before I started teaching that class, and so I have like one slide about it in my notes. That's also one of those things where, at least when I've been in clinic, I've never heard anybody reference that. Like when we talk about the points of the 4Cs, that was something that's mentioned in the Neijing, and we have to learn about it in points 1 class. But I feel like it's very uncommon when you get into clinical practice to be like, oh, this person feels like their body is bigger than normal. I'm going to use the points of the Sea of Qi. So I don't know if that helps. Another question that was in the comments. Yeah, scalp points. I had a teacher who used a lot of scalp points. So for those neurological disorders, I would just go to things in the scalp. Think about like we have different lines, motor and neuro lines, balance lines. I would think more about that, or think more about the channels that connect to the brain. I might think about that, like dew channel, liver channel, stuff like that. This was another one that came across in one of the comments. Can you make a video about optimal diet in TCM, or even recipes in TCM? I thought this was interesting. I kind of gave him a short answer, but I may go off on a huge tangent. But I figured this was food themed. So first of all, if you want to, if you're interested in recipes about that use Chinese medicine, there's a book that was written by some of my teachers at school. I think I have it here somewhere. I think it's a button up here. Does that work? There we go. Before I did a live stream, am I looking at the right? Before I did a live stream where I talked about books, and this is one of the books I talked about. This was written by a couple of teachers at my school, and one of them was their partner. And so if you're interested in recipes that reference Chinese medicine, this is a really good book to have. I don't have my physical copy because I gave my physical copy to my parents. So that's why I'm showing a picture. That's why I'm showing a picture on the screen instead of like holding up the actual book. Because it's a very user-friendly book. This is something that you can get for yourself. It's also very good to recommend to your patients. And so if they're interested in learning more about is basic Chinese principles like yin and yang, 5 flavors and stuff like that, then that can apply to herbs. And then if they're interested in cooking healthy meals, this is a very good book to have. And so it's something you can even recommend to your patients. And so it's very user-friendly. It's written for a Western audience in mind. So if you look, like here's an example of a recipe: savory squash and adzuki bean soup. And so it's a normal recipe book. And then we kind of zoomed in here. You can see at the bottom it says, for those familiar with traditional Chinese, dumplings. For those familiar with traditional Chinese medicine, it helps the spleen and the kidneys. And so he talks about how adzuki beans are good for draining damp. So this is also a really good one to have. Like I said, it's good for yourself, but it's also good to give your patients, because like the first 60 pages goes through a basic primer on TCM theory, and then it just lists out the properties of certain foods and some of the studies that were done on food. So it'll talk about like the properties of ginger, green tea, or like that one, adzuki beans, things like that. And so if your patients are interested in those, sorry, I'm kicking my microphone. If your patients are interested in those things, that can be a really good user-friendly beginner book for them to get. I have a different computer, so let's see if my screen share thing works. I think this is work. Yeah, because when I did this before on my laptop, it just went way too slow. Let's see if this works. So here, this is on Amazon. So I put a link to it in the description below. If you want to click on that link, that's an Amazon affiliate link. So I think it's like Amazon will give me like a 50-cent commission. But full disclosure, that is an Amazon affiliate link. So I will get a small commission when you click on that link and buy something. But yeah, this is the book. And then what's really cool, I guess not a lot of people know about this, if you go up and click Look Inside, then it will give you a bunch of pages about what's in the book. So you'll be able to read some of the introductory stuff, and then so the introduction kind of goes through a primer on TCM, then it goes through a bunch of stuff about different the properties of different foods, and then it actually has some recipes here. So you can go through and kind of get a preview of what's in here. It has some of the recipes, and then sometimes it has little notes like Yuan says. That's Yuan Wang was a teacher at our school, and so she kind of gives some perspective of how these types of recipes might be used in China. And like I said, what it's especially good for, and it'll kind of give the TCM view of what the recipe is good for. So that's something like if you're not sure about this book, you can go click this Look Inside button, and it'll kind of give you a preview of some of those things. Like I said, there's a link. Yeah, there's a link below. I put a couple links below. All right, I think my computer still works. Hopefully I'm less squinty too, because I have a much larger screen, so I think it's easier to read the comments because I'm less squinty. What were we talking about? Diet. So to answer part of that question, recipes in TCM, that's a good place to look, is that book. Also, I've seen that if you go on the Mayway blog, Mayway is an herb supplier. Let me type that in. Mayway.com. They're a wholesaler of herbs, so if you're a student or practitioner, you can sign up to get a wholesale account with them and buy herbs from them. I really like their herbs, but they're usually out of stock of most of the things I want. But anyway, at that website, Mayway.com, they have a blog that sometimes has recipes. So there was one that was like, they made a cranberry sauce with shanjia in it. They have one blog about different medicinal wines you can make and things like that. So if you're looking for TCM recipes, that's another place you can look, is just look for the Mayway blog. But I do highly recommend that book by... I want to say it's by Warren, but I think it's actually Mika Ono who did most of the writing. So that Ancient Wisdom, Modern Kitchen is a really good book to have. Can you make a video about optimal diet in TCM? So I thought this was also an interesting thing to talk about, because this is a question that patients will often ask as well, that they'll come in and say, what's the best diet, or how should I be eating? And so sometimes it's good to be able to know something to tell your patients. And sometimes when you get this question about optimal diet, I feel like people are talking about, like, is it the Mediterranean diet? Is it the Atkins diet, a low-carb diet? Is it the Zone diet? Is it the Whole30 diet? Which one of these diets is best? Or is there such a thing as a TCM diet? And I think the answer is really no. There is no best diet. I guess I'm of the opinion that everybody is very different, and so they'll have to approach their diet differently. And also people have different goals, so you might have to adjust your diet based on your goals. Whereas if you're a marathon runner, your diet might look different than if you're a bodybuilder versus if you're someone who just sits around all day. So diet is going to be very individualized. As far as I know, there's no one like TCM diet. It's more that we have certain principles that we follow based on the theory of our medicine and based on recommendations in like Yang Sheng and Nourishing Life. So sometimes we have like the very basic recommendations about when we talk about we want to keep the spleen happy. So we'll say things like avoid raw food, avoid dairy, avoid cold food. But again, so I think these are kind of interesting because again, like when we say raw food, when most students hear that or when we talk about in school, most people think raw food, they think like kale smoothies and salads and stuff like that we should avoid that kind of raw food. It's actually interesting. Nigel Weissman had a footnote in one of his books where he says, actually, in ancient China, when they said avoid raw food, they actually meant raw meat. Like, don't eat raw beef, don't eat raw chicken. If you eat raw chicken, you'll get salmonella and it'll be very bad for you. So when they said avoid raw food, they were actually talking about raw meat, not necessarily raw vegetables. However, they also say avoid cold food. And so a lot of raw vegetables would fall more into the category of cold food. So you should still probably avoid them. We prefer to eat things cooked. Some people are really into raw food and they say, oh, it has more nutrients. And kind of our counter argument to that is let's look at, instead of just looking at what nutrients are in the food, think about bioavailability. That a lot of times when you talk about how much nutrient is being absorbed from a food, that it's like steamed carrots have more nutrient absorption than raw carrots. So we can kind of make this argument that there's more bioavailability in cooked food. But also, I think even those recommendations are very individualized. And so it's more about seeing what works for you. That there are some people that they eat raw food that I drink smoothies and stuff like that, and I think it's fine for me. Even the recommendation avoid dairy, I feel like that comes from a lot of Asian people from that region just can't process dairy, and maybe that's why they say dairy is bad for your spleen. But if you're from Northern European descent, it could be that you have no problem with dairy. Like I've done things where like I drink milk and with whey protein twice a day, and I never had any problems with it. So I think even those recommendations, it can be very highly individualized. It's about what works for you and kind of being honest with yourself about trying different things and seeing what works for you. But then we can also talk about different things. We also have different recommendations about like eating with the seasons. So this is a sort of thing where there's a reason pumpkin spice lattes come out in the fall, because pumpkin spice is basically cinnamon, ginger, nutmeg, then it's clove, allspice. These are all warming spices. So you eat those spices when the weather gets cold. If you eat pumpkin pie or pumpkin spice lattes in the summer, people are going to look at you funny. On the other hand, watermelon is a very cooling food. You eat watermelon in the summer when it's hot. If you eat watermelon in the winter, people are going to look at you funny. So that's another thing. It's not really a diet, but we do want to align our food choices with the seasons. A lot of times we'll make recommendations with the 5 flavors that you want to eat a variety of colors and a variety of flavors. And this is something that we even say in Western nutrition, that in order to avoid nutrient deficiencies, an easy way to do that is just making sure that you're eating a variety of colors. And if you do that, you'll get a wide variety of nutrients. So they'll say, so that's kind of a yang sheng thing, is we should eat all 5 colors and then we should balance out all 5 flavors. And so that's something that you'll see a lot in Chinese cuisine, that they pay attention to the 5 flavors, that they'll have acrid things like ginger and white onion, or scallion, green onion, garlic. They'll have salty things like soy sauce. They'll have sour things like vinegar, rice wine vinegar. They'll have bitter things like bitter melon or bitter greens. And so they'll combine all 5 flavors. They also combine the colors, that you have soy sauce is black and it's salty and represents water. And so you can combine different colors of vegetables as well. So they like to have that variety of colors and flavors. You'll see that a lot in Thai cuisine as well. But you can also apply this to other types of cuisine. So it's kind of, I guess what I'm saying is, any type of diet, if it works for you, then it works. And I just think that, now I'm going off into a tangent. What we do need to be careful of is, I think that, like I said, diet is very individualized. And so we as practitioners have to make sure that we don't get too judgmental when our patients come in with a diet that we might not be familiar with. Because it's like, I've had some people that they go on a low carb ketogenic diet and it works really well for them. They lose weight, they feel great, it works well. That's great. Other people try it and it doesn't work so well. I've had some people do a Whole30 diet and they really like it. They feel good. They feel very energetic. I had one friend who went on a Whole30 diet and physically it was good for her, but she had to stop doing it because she just became so neurotic about food that mentally it wasn't healthy for her to focus on what kinds of foods to eat and not eat. And so I think that if your patient comes in and talks about diet, we have to make sure that you're kind of open that if their diet is different from yours, that if it's working for them, that doesn't mean it's bad. So when people say things like I'm one of those bros that I eat 200 grams of protein every day. And so a lot of people are like, oh, that's so bad for your kidneys. Your kidneys are going to shut down. Your kidneys can't process that much protein. And I'm kind of like, is that based on research and a peer-reviewed scientific article? Or is that based on a blog article from a vegan blog that you read 10 years ago? Because I can give you peer-reviewed research that says you can eat as much, as long as you don't have underlying kidney deficiencies, you can eat as much protein as you want. So, I don't know. I'm rambling now, but it's like don't be too judgmental about other people's diets. If it works for them, it's kind of like do what works for you. Experiment and do what works for you. Fire in the kidneys. How do you fire up your kidneys? I might say yes and no to that. A lot of times, like I think in Ayurveda, they talk about digestive fire. And I think that might be closer to what we talk about in TCM when we talk about the Piwelun, the treatise on the spleen and stomach in the spleen stomach school, that the spleen likes to be warm. So I think we're really talking more about having warmth in the spleen. However, it's also true that the yang of the spleen is dependent on the yang of the kidneys. So when you talk about pattern diagnosis, sometimes that goes together. Spleen yang deficiency is created from an underlying kidney yang deficiency. We can even relate that to the 5 elements when we say that fire generates earth. You can think about that, the heart and the spleen, but sometimes when we say fire generates earth, what we mean is the Mingmen fire of the kidneys is supporting the spleen. And that's another way we can interpret fire generating earth. So I'm not sure I would necessarily think about firing up the kidneys. I would think more about the spleen, things like ginger and stuff like that. I think that's a very common thing in Ayurveda where they say have some ginger before your meal to help fire up your digestive system and secrete gastric juices and things like that. So I would think more about keeping the spleen warm. Like we said, avoiding cold things, avoiding raw things, avoiding smoothies and ice cream, and eating warming things like soups and stews. Eating things with ginger and other warming spices can be good. But then again, we just have to balance that out, that if it's the middle of summer, maybe you don't need to fire up your kidneys. Maybe the chi of the seasons is warm enough. You don't need to add any additional heat. What else do we have? This was a really interesting one that was in one of the comments. And I'm not sure if I responded to it or not. How are we doing on time? Okay. We're getting to the end of the hour, so maybe this will be the last one. Or if you have any questions, go ahead and leave them in the comments. But this was an interesting question that somebody said, if I eat the spleen organ, usually in supplement form, I'm not sure where to get spleens. I've never been to a butcher and seen a spleen there, but I have seen it in supplement form. If I eat the spleen, would this benefit spleen deficiency? And I thought this was a really interesting question Because I don't know. I've actually never heard of that. Because usually when we talk about like eating organs or organs benefiting organs, we usually talk about it in terms of like eating a liver can support your liver, and that kind of makes sense from Western nutrition wise too, because liver has a lot of iron and stuff like that. So eating liver is very good for anemia. And so in TCM, we would say eating the liver is a good way to nourish liver blood. I think it's very common or more common in Chinese cuisine that they'll eat tendons. And so they'll say eating tendons are good for your tendons. But it turns out eating tendons have a lot of collagen, so that will support your tendons. So I know we say those things with other things like liver and tendons. I'm not sure I've ever heard of that with the spleen. I think maybe I've even heard of that with the heart, where people eat heart. It could be that eating heart is good for your heart. But I've never actually heard of anybody eating a spleen. And so this was very interesting to me. Awesome, David. Thank you for being here. I think David has been here like every time. I think David's on the Patreon. So, David, I really appreciate you being here. Have a good new year. We'll probably see you in the next one. But thank you. But talking about eating spleens, this is something I ran across. That you can get spleens in supplement form. And so this is here you have this brand of grass-fed beef spleen. So I guess there are people who eat just spleens, or you can get beef organs, which is a combination of liver, heart, kidney, pancreas, and spleen. So you're getting all the cow organs in one supplement. So this is interesting that I feel like the people who like these supplements, I think this became a thing when the carnivore diet started gaining some popularity, that they were all about you can eat just meat, but you have to eat the entire animal. They would use the phrase snout to tail. Sorry, dumplings. And so that's how these supplements came about, is that they're trying to get all of their nutrients, and so their way of doing it is by taking in the organs as well. So I actually don't know very much about that, about spleen in particular. So if anybody knows about what it's like eating spleen, or if this is something you've heard of people doing traditionally in China, eating the spleen, I'd be really curious to know about that. The other thing I would say is, like I said, I feel like it's more common. We usually use that analogy with the liver. And so I will say that sometimes I do recommend the supplement. Sorry, I minimized it again. They also have just a desiccated liver supplement. And so sometimes I will recommend that to people as sort of like a natural iron supplement. That when you just take iron pills, it's really hard to absorb the iron. But if you eat liver, then because it's just the form of the iron is much more easier to absorb. But it's also true that liver is gross and nobody likes eating liver. So that's kind of a way around that, is you can get liver in pill form. It's desiccated, it's dried out and ground into a powder, and you just take pills, and that's a way to take liver. And sometimes that's very good. How do I want to say this? Sometimes I get patients, especially women with blood deficiency, and I'll ask them, "Are you vegetarian?" And they'll say no, but they just don't like meat. And I'm not sure if this is like a social thing, that it's not as socially acceptable for women to eat meat, that women are supposed to eat salads and quinoa and not eat hamburgers. Or I think for some people it's just a texture. They don't like the texture of meat. But I do get patients who say they're not strictly vegetarian, they just don't like meat. Sometimes I'll recommend those liver pills as a way of like, you're getting all the nutrients of the meat, but you don't have to taste it. Sometimes even if you might have vegetarians that are willing to be flexible with that the organs are kind of the leftover parts, so it's not driving the butchering process, so they might be okay with that. But that's one option in terms of trying to supplement liver blood. That might be a way to do it, is to take liver in supplement form. I tried eating liver, and I had a Russian friend who tried to get me to eat liver, and I was never very good at it. Elizabeth is asking about 5 shoe points. Yeah, and that's something I want to get into that I started making videos about. I made like one video that was an intro to channels video, and my plan was to make a whole series of going through primary channels, secondary channels, and then channel categories or point categories. So I've been like wanting to make a video about that, and I've made a whole bunch of other things. So when we talk about 5 shoe points, we mean the 5 shoe transport points. And these are very good to know. They're very important. Basically, a lot of times these are the most important points on a channel. So especially when you have really long channels that have 45 or 67 points on them, you don't always want to pay attention to all the points, but the ones that have a point category tend to be very important. And 5 shoe transport points tend to be especially confusing because the information is coming from several different sources. Like they're talked about in one chapter in the Neijing, then they say something a little bit different in a different chapter of the Neijing, and then the Nanjing says something different. And we're trying to like pull in all these different things from different places. And so sometimes it gets really confusing about what all of these do. So Elizabeth, if you want, email me, and I can try to email you. I have some notes. I can email them to you. I don't think I put them on the website just because I'm not sure if it's good with copyright yet, because usually I have to draw my own pictures instead of stealing from textbooks. But I have some PowerPoint slides if you think that would help that kind of go over them. But basically, what's a good way to say this? When we talk about point categories, basically you have 2 types of point categories. There are some point categories that they exist on every channel, and we have some point categories that are spread across various channels. So we have some categories like every channel has a Qi cleft point. There's a Qi cleft point of the lung, there's a Qi cleft point of the large intestine, there's a Qi cleft point of the stomach, and so on. When you talk about yuan source points, every channel has a yuan source point. We have other types of point categories that are really just more groups of points. So when we talk about the 8 influential points, that's just kind of a grouping of points that are scattered across the body that have a common function. Or when you talk about front mu points, that's just a group of points on the front of the body, and they're scattered across various channels. So it's not like there's an 8 influential point of the lung and an 8 influential point of the large intestine. No, it's more like this is just a group of points. So there are certain point categories that exist on every channel. Every channel has a Qi cleft point, every channel has a yuan source point, every channel has 5 shoe transport points. And kind of the underlying theory of the 5 shoe transport points is basically what we're saying is as the channel starts out, you can think of the channels starting at the tips of the fingers and the toes, and as they go towards the trunk, they grow or they develop. They grow in size and in function. And so that's why we say things like, at the wells, the qi appears, and then it rushes down, and then it dives deep, and then it merges with everything else. So we're talking about the way the channel develops as it goes towards the elbow and towards the trunk. And because the qi dynamic is different at these different stages, the points on the channels can have a different effect on the body depending on where they are in this flow. And so when we talk about the functions of the 5 shoe points, that's what we're talking about, is the function related to how the qi is progressing along the channel. So the channels start out very narrow and very superficial. As they go up the arm, they get wider and deeper and wider and deeper. And then by the time you get to the trunk, the channels kind of lose their differentiation. It's just kind of like you have a whole bunch of qi here. That's why a lot of things on the trunk, the points aren't necessarily specific to their channel. They're more specific to the area of the body. So points on the chest are good for the chest. Points on the abdomen are good for the abdomen, Anyway, so with the 5 shu transport points, we have a couple ways we can think about them. One would be kind of in our the Neijing thing. We just talk about things like Jing wells are good for reviving consciousness. They tend to treat the opposite end of the channel, so a lot of times pricking things on the fingers will benefit the throat or the eyes because they treat the opposite end of the channel. Yin spring points clear heat, or they say therefore diseases that manifest as a change in the complexion. Basically, if your face turns red, that means you have heat, and things like that. So we say different things about that. In our school, I remember when I was in school, we learned a mnemonic: most sane families are against incest. That later it was changed to insects because I think some students complained about incest. So most sane families are against insects, and it's kind of like Jing wells are the most superficial, so they have a quick effect. They're able to revive consciousness or quickly drain excess because they're the most superficial, most sane families. F means febrile disease. Yin spring points treat heat and febrile diseases. Most sane families are. R means arthritis, that the shu stream points are good for joint pain and things like that. We're basically talking about B syndrome or dampness in the channels. Most sane families are. Against means asthma. Jing river points are good for respiratory things or diseases that manifest as a change in the voice. Most sane families are against insects. Insects means intestines. C points are good for intestinal disorders like diarrhea. So that was one way we would remember that, and I have that in mind. I think I have a slide on that in those notes. Another way to remember it is based on the 5-phase correspondences, that we have 5 shu transport points. The Nanjing was all about 5-phase correspondences, so each of the 5 shu transport points corresponds to one of the 5 elements. And it's different on yin and yang channels. We just want to focus on the yin channels. Jing well points on yin channels are associated with wood. Why do we say so? Because wood is associated with the eastern regions and with spring. The direction of east, that's the direction of the rising sun. The season of spring, that's when things come to life. That's when animals come out of hibernation. That's when the plants begin to grow. So the phase of wood represents beginnings. So when we talk about the 5 shu transport points, the first point is wood because it represents beginnings. Wood is associated with the liver. Sorry, getting distracted. Wood is associated with the liver, and the liver exists below the heart. So Jing well points treat fullness below the heart. And basically, we're talking about like liver qi stagnation. So according to the Nanjing, Jing well points treat fullness below the heart. Yin spring points are associated with fire, and so the Nanjing says through the springs one can master body heat. So again, we're talking about yin spring points clear heat. Shu stream points are associated with earth. Think earth is the spleen, and think dampness. So the Nanjing says through the streams one can master a heavy body as well as pain in the joints. So shu stream means earth, dampness. Dampness weighs you down and causes you to have a heavy body. When you get dampness in the joints, that can cause joint pain and arthritis. Basically, B syndrome is wind, cold, damp. That's what we're talking about, shu stream points and the earth element, or the earth phase. Jing river points are associated with metal. You can think metal lungs, and so that's why we say like asthma or respiratory problems or diseases that manifest as a change in the voice. Jing river, that's what Jing river points are. Si is associated with water. Water is the kidneys. And this one's a little bit weird because we say kidneys are with diarrhea. And that's kind of weird because usually we think of diarrhea as being more of a spleen thing. But kind of in the Nanjing, they talk more about diarrhea being associated with the kidneys. So you can think of that with kidney yang deficiency. A person has early morning diarrhea, watery diarrhea with undigested food. And so that's why we say the He points are good for diarrhea, as well as qi flowing contrary to its proper course, so like rebellious qi. So that's another way to think about that's kind of the way I prefer, is that on the one hand we have this mnemonic device about most sane families. That's one way, and that's more of the what's given in the Neijing. Another way to think about it is through the Nanjing with the 5-phase correspondences. However, neither of those represents the complete picture, because we also say things like the He points on the yang channels treat the Fu organs, or we say Jing River points benefit the tendons, and things like that. So it does get a little bit more complicated than that. I hope that was okay. That was kind of like a meandering explanation of those. So I'll make a more coherent video about that at some point. I say that now, it might be like a year from now before I actually get that done. The other thing, though, is you can go through, usually I highlight those functions in the point video. So like if you go and look at the video on the lung channel, whenever it comes up, when you talk about lung 11, it pops up with these are the functions of the Jing Well points. When you talk about lung 10, it pops up with these are the functions of the Ying Spring points. So it's kind of like when you're first starting out in points 1, you kind of go through the functions of these 5 shu points and it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But then once you start going through the actual functions and indications of the points, if you remember that and relate it back, then it will start to make more sense. That when we say, when you look at lung 11 and you say, oh, it's good for reviving consciousness in case of a stroke, it's good for quickly clearing heat, quickly clearing excess, then it starts to make more sense. When you look at lung 10 and you say, oh, it's good for sore throat because it's a fire point and it clears heat from the throat, so lung 10 is really good for clearing lung heat. You look at lung 9, then things start to make more sense when you actually look at the functions and indications of the points. So that kind of applies to all of the beginning of your first points class, that you go through all of this stuff about the channels and the point categories, and it doesn't make any sense. And then when you get into the actual points, then you kind of relate it back and it starts to make more sense. I think the same thing in herbs with when you talk about the 5 flavors, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Then when you talk about the individual herbs, you can kind of relate it and make more sense out of it. All right. We're getting on an hour. Let me see, any other questions before we go? Oh, I don't want that. Can you comment about this 6-element theory? I don't know. You'll have to tell me what it is. I'm not familiar with 6-element theory, so I'm not sure if that's like a heavenly stems and branches. So I'll have to look into that and see what that is. But I think we got everything. I think there's a garbage truck outside, if that's what's beeping. So I think we'll just go ahead and leave it there. Like I said, I want to get back into doing this regularly, so I'll probably get back into a habit of doing regular weekly live streams. Before, I was kind of alternating the times so that I could accommodate different people. There were some people in the Philippines that like a afternoon worked better, and some people a morning worked better, some people a weekend worked better. I think I might just try to stick to regular day and regular time, and just always do this Friday at 10 a.m. 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. And so we might just do it as a regular thing on that. And then if you can't make it, if you have questions, you can leave them in the comments, or you can email me, and I can answer them in the next one. So even if you're not here live, you can watch it on the replay. Special thank you to the Patreon members. If you want to support the site, there's a link to the Patreon, and especially when people leave comments on the Patreon feed, I like to prioritize those. So thank you to those people who support the site. And even if you can't support the site, I know it's not in the budget of very many people. When you're in school, things are expensive. But even if you can't support the site through Patreon, thank you for being here. Thank you for your comments. And then, like I said, I think with every one we might do like a mini topic at the beginning of each one. So I think next week we're going to go over some of the common Chinese terminology we see in herbal formulas. So like before, in the single herb review course, I went over some common terms that are used in single herbs, like the plant parts, like the colors, and things like that. So next week we might briefly go over some terms that come up in formula names. So when you hear a formula like Buzhang Tong or Liu Junzi Tong, some of the common terms that come up in those formulas. So I think that's what we're going to talk about next week, and then just do a free-for-all Q&A. So I think that's all for today. Thank you for being here. Thank you for the comments. We'll see you next time.